This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Go to our website at wdtatpodcast.com and click on support to learn how you can be part of this effort to learn how to have better conversations, increase compassion, and build bridges, not walls. You can make a one-time donation or become a patron for as little as $1 a month and receive patron-only benefits. This week's shout-out to our patrons goes to Chrissy Florence and Bethany Smith. Thanks for becoming patrons, and thanks for supporting the podcast, Bethany and Chrissy. Now let's get into the interview. In this episode, I talked to Pastor Erica Lea Simka about LGBTQ identities and terminology. I practice introducing myself with my pronouns for the first time, get corrected more than once, and we almost have an altar call when she tells me about the antidote to call-out culture. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about things we're not supposed to, learn how to have difficult conversations, and talk to people about what makes them different. This is the We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land podcast, where we do talk about that with me, Lucas Land.
It's never the right place or time. It's imperceptible to the eye. It's never the right place or time.
My guest today is Erica Lea Simka. She is pastor of Albuquerque Mennonite Church. Welcome to the podcast, Erica.
Hi, Lucas. Glad to be here.
So today I invited you to help me with talking about some basics about LGBTQ topics, questions, terminology, definitions, things like that. I have shared on this podcast before some of my community's journey with LGBTQ questions in our community, and but one of the things that I remember very clearly in that process was we had a meeting where we were going over some terminology, and I remember at the end of that meeting there were some people who said, why are we doing this? It's so basic. It feels like we already know this stuff. We've already been talking about this for a while. Why are we going back to square one? And then there were other people in our same community who said, oh my gosh, thank you so much for talking about this and going through some of these definitions, and it was so helpful. So I think one of the things I realize is we don't know where people are at in terms of their understanding of LGBTQ people and topics, identities, and so I thought it would be really helpful. But as somebody who hasn't experienced those identities, does not identify as LGBTQ, I wanted some help from you. So thank you so much for being here and helping me.
Glad to be here and glad to comment. I think I've done a lot of thinking and processing for myself, and I can certainly speak to my experiences and friends and contacts and the consensus that I hear. But like every community, there's going to be a variety of reasons why or why not a term works for someone or a certain community. So I just want to make sure to include that nuance, that I'm not here representing all LGBTQ people. I'm not here representing all Christians or all pastors or all white people. These are all things that I am. Right. But there's always a challenge when speaking to individual and also shared experiences and communities.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for saying that. I think as we maybe talk about some of the terminology, we'll find that we can bring in some of that nuance and maybe share, too, why some people like certain terms and not other terms, and what some of those different distinctions are. But before we dive into the alphabet soup of LGBTQ identities, tell us a little bit about yourself. One thing that I'm learning, I'm working on being better at, is sharing my own pronouns and how I identify. So I have already mentioned that I'm a straight, white. Well, I don't know if I mentioned this. Maybe this was in the pre-show when you and I were discussing, but I'm a straight, cisgendered white guy, and I use he, him, his pronouns. Was that okay? I feel like that's the first time I've publicly said that.
Oh, good. I'm very proud of you. Yes.
I was a little nervous, Erica. I'm being really honest right now. I was a little nervous about that.
The only thing is, my understanding is when talking about gender, it's better to say cisgender rather than cisgendered.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's just some of those nuances.
That makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I am Erica Lea Simka, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. And I am a white American. My ancestors were settlers on land already inhabited by Native Americans, by indigenous people. And I grew up in Houston in a Southern Baptist family that was conservative, but not like fundamentalist or crazy town. I guess that depends on your definition of that. But kind of right-leaning moderate, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Middle-class family. I was a middle child growing up, just, church and school and all that sort of business. And, on some level, I kind of always knew that, especially as I got to be kind of an adolescent and older, that some of my interests and some of my friends who were girls or other girls in my classes or things, I think I was interested in them in a way they weren't interested in me or other girls in general. So it's like I knew something was kind of different, but I also was raised in a church that it was just understood. It was very heteronormative. This is not a Bible bashing, the gays are going to hell sort of thing. It was just a very silent or quiet, rather, on this topic. It was just assumed, men and women are, married and that sort of thing. So I knew it wasn't okay to feel the way I felt. I knew it wasn't okay to be gay. But I think a lot of my concept of what it meant to be gay, and I do identify as gay, and gay is sometimes used to refer to homosexual men or women, though lesbian can also refer to a homosexual woman. So I generally use the term gay for myself just as a personal preference.
Okay, so you're already touching on the alphabet soup, and a lot of people are familiar with the LG part of LGBTQIA plus, but I think even people who are more familiar maybe or feel maybe more comfortable at least with that, I'm not sure we're all necessarily very comfortable with the understanding of sexual orientation. And I shared in a previous episode about a little bit about my coming out story, that when I was in 5th grade, I remember having vividly that I had this dream about my babysitter who was female, and that seemed to like stir all these feelings that I don't remember having before that, right? And then I became very interested in women and attracted to women. And most of us don't think about that. So I don't know if you have anything else to add to this area of sexual orientation, which when we talk about the B, we could get more into maybe what that means. But what do you know about sexual orientation that's helpful to us as we're thinking about what it is and what it means, especially for those of us who haven't had to think about it,
Yeah, well, let me just start with gender and sexual minorities. Sometimes instead of using the acronym, I'll reference that as a very broad, just kind of category for what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit tricky, even within the community. And by that, I mean rainbow people.
I like
because
that too.
The LGB is more orientation, and the T for
Mm-hmm.
transgender is more gender. And while they are connected and
Mm-hmm.
related, there are lots of different combinations. And so to have gender
Mm-hmm.
and orientation together in one acronym in one community, guess who often gets left out of those conversations? Transgender people,
Mm.
because they get one letter and
Mm-hmm.
everyone else gets three, so it's
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's kind of tricky to talk about both together, but I also think it's important to try to include everybody. And that's one of the reasons
Mm-hmm.
there's a plus mark. I'm not entirely clear if that plus mark on LGBTQIA plus, if that plus
Mm-hmm.
means and everyone else who may not identify with any of the previous letters. I think it means that, but
Mm-hmm.
I would
Mm-hmm.
need to double check that. See, I've been out for 5 years and I'm still learning as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's important to say too, is that I don't want, I think I've mentioned many, many times in the difficult conversations that we've had on the podcast that curiosity is a huge part of being able to have hard conversations. And a huge part of curiosity is being able to say, I don't know everything. There's got to be something more I need to learn. And so approaching it that way, I think is really helpful. So
Yeah.
we all have more to learn.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
I think even after listening to this fabulous podcast, even after looking at all the good and quote right resources online with GLAD, with PFLAG, with the Human Rights Campaign, with all these
Mm.
organizations that there's an Associated Press guidelines when the news media speaks or writes about this community. Even if you look at all of that, whenever
Mm-hmm.
you meet someone, you still don't know where they're at unless you ask them.
Right.
And so I think one of the most important things when talking about or to an LGBTQIA person is to use whatever
Mm-hmm.
name, pronouns, terms, and language they use for themselves, for the person who's listening to mirror
Yeah.
that back to them. It doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense to you. It doesn't matter your opinion about it, honestly. If someone tells you my name
Yeah.
is Bob and you call them John, like that's weird, right? So it's really
Yeah.
important to just respect and receive the terms and names and information people use for themselves, even if you might have a different opinion, because your opinion doesn't matter in a way when it comes to that.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And being willing to risk, I think. I mean, I kind of knew I needed to practice asking, giving my own, how I identify and my own pronouns and asking you that. And that's something I'm not very good at yet. And so it's a thing you risk, right? You have to be a little bit vulnerable. And I think that's what makes it hard for people to get started, maybe, because
yeah.
it feels a little bit vulnerable to do that. So,
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
let me can I just go through the acronym for just a minute?
Yes.
So one of the problems is that queerness, and I will explain in a minute why I use that term in language,
Mm-hmm.
has been very white gay man centric.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the terminology and power, money, influential people in the community have been white gay men, which means many of us have benefited from the work and resources that these men have given to the community, and I'm thankful for that. There's also some corrective in that. So sometimes the community will be called gay in a very generic way,
Right.
but again, that normalizes a gay man's experience and doesn't really represent the community. So that's one of the reasons why queer has become more accepted, especially with some of the younger generations, is because queer, meaning strange, unusual, different than the norm, is really a reference to something other than the heteronormative, cisgender normative society. And so that's some of how that happened with the Q. So L for lesbian, this is women who are attracted to women. Gay is, and these are generalities, men who are attracted to men. B is bisexual, and it really does mean attraction to two genders. That may or may not be men and women. That could be a variety of different genders, because gender is a whole range rather than two different categories. So I think that's one of the things that's misunderstood about the bisexual community that's really important to learn about, and I am still learning about that. T is for transgender. So this is someone who was assigned, for example, male at birth, but during their life, they understand themselves as a girl or as a woman, and how they understand themselves, how they wish to be socially, just who they are is different than the sex they were assigned at birth. So it could be male to female transgender or female to male transgender. There are more transgender people in this world than we can ever imagine, because a lot of people, quote unquote, pass, as in you may not be able to identify them. And so I think that's one of the ways that it's helpful to identify pronouns for ourselves, just to normalize that in case someone does want to talk about their experience, if that is their experience.
And just another thing that I think is helpful for people, as you mentioned before, where I used cisgendered as kind of a verb, it's also, my understanding is transgendered is also not generally accepted, or it comes across as like somebody doing something to you, or like because it makes it into a verb rather than someone's identity. At least that's kind of how I understand it.
Yeah, there are some really excellent resources online, especially when it comes to gender and somewhat orientation, but gender language, what is generally good or acceptable or minimally offensive. And so there are some really great resources online that I'll be glad to share, because I think it's really important just to read, especially if you're someone who does a bit of writing or any sort of helping profession, clergy, of course. So there's some great stuff there. So something I think that's misunderstood in the acronym is what Q stands for. So sometimes you'll even see QQ. And the reason that is because the Q sometimes means queer. Again, I already shared about queer, meaning something different than the expected heteronormative, cis-normative society. The other Q can mean questioning. And so sometimes it's helpful to really include both of those Qs there, so that maybe young people or people of any age who are questioning can be represented in the acronym, which means that they're represented in the community as, hi, I'm here, is really what each letter represents. So I'm not real keen on that term alphabet soup. It feels a little kind of flippant or dismissive, because each of these letters is a way of saying, hi, I'm here, I count, and I'm important.
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize for using that, but I think people feel overwhelmed by it when they don't know. They do feel like, oh my gosh, there's so many letters and I just don't even know what they all mean. And so hopefully we're helping a little bit break that down, and I really appreciate that. I had forgotten about there being two Qs sometimes included, and I do think that's very helpful. It feels like there's a lot of pressure for people who I like your term gender and sexual minorities because that's feels very inclusive without needing to add more letters necessarily. Because there's a lot of pressure for people to have it all figured out, sort of, right? Mm-hmm. Like if they are gender and sexual minorities, then they're going to get grilled about, well, what about this? You know, if they're Christian, then they're going to get grilled about Bible verses, or they're going to get grilled about like whether or not people choose, or the science, or so many different things to have it all figured out. And a lot of people are on a process, in a journey of trying to understand themselves. I mean, I'm in a process of trying to understand myself, and if somebody tried to nail me down on certain aspects of my own life, like I would probably have a hard time, you know? Like I'm trying to figure some things out about myself, and normalizing that too. It's okay that you don't have it all figured out, or you don't know what to call it. I remember a friend of mine who came out several years ago in our faith community, and she used different terms at different times to try and describe kind of how she understood herself. And I think it's helpful to know that's okay, and to normalize that cue as questioning. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. So the I typically means intersex. And so this is a person who, let me just pull this up. This is the definition from the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Okay.
So this is their definition of intersex. Intersex people are individuals born with any of several variations in sex characteristics, including chromosomes, gonads, sex hormones, or genitals. And so the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights says that intersex individuals do not fit the typical definitions for female or male bodies. Mm-hmm. And so historically, what's often happened for intersex people is that a baby will be born intersex, again, with a variation of any of these characteristics. And then the doctor or the parents will make a decision, male or female, and they will alter the genitals or, the body in a way to fit. Mm-hmm. And there have been so many stories about how damaging that can be. Because when you're looking at a, 12-hour-old baby, you can't just make that decision for somebody. So I think this intersex is one of those areas that really needs to have more education on, because it can really do a number on people, and it can be really painful, as all of these gender and sexual minorities can. But there are particular concerns and wounds to every letter in the community, especially intersex. So I wanted to use the language from the UN office because this is an area that I'm certainly still learning and growing in myself.
I remember I had done some reading about it previously, but I couldn't remember the statistics. I was surprised at how common it is. I'll include the UN Human Rights Commission as well, but Intersex Society of North America has a good FAQ, and they list the number of the different conditions that are counted under intersex. Bringing those all together, they say that the total number of people whose bodies differ from standard male or female is 1 in 100 births. And that I think that's really surprising to people who kind of go, oh, well, that's just not common. Like people are just making stuff up, and this is really, far out there. That's 1% of the population. So that's like what is it? If we're 7 billion people, that's like 700 million. I'm very bad at math, Erica. Oh no. I think it's 70 million. That would be 70 million people, right?
Yeah, I'm not good at math either. But the world's at about 8 billion people now, but point taken. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, so 80 billion. We're closer to 80 million people, but that's a whole lot of people who have in some way have an experience that has to do with their physical gender that's intersex, and whether that's chromosomes or all the different varieties of issues that people can have, it just goes to show it's way more common than you think it is, just because you don't know somebody, or you probably do know somebody, but somebody hasn't told you their story. That just to be aware that even the physical aspects of gender that people often seem to say are so clear are not as clear as we have thought they were, I guess. If I could put it that way.
That's quite true. I do want to just jump in and offer a little clarification. Sex is physical. Gender is mental and social. And I think that's part of something that's really important for people to understand. There's a great resource that often gets passed around at trainings and things called the gender bread. And it looks like a gingerbread person, but it has some of these concepts in a visual way that can help folks understand a little bit more about a range of genders and a range of experiences related to sex and gender.
Yeah, I actually love that resource and see that they're now on like version 4. They keep kind of updating it and tweaking it to make it more clear and more helpful. And I've already got the link for it in the show notes, because I do find that so helpful, that graphic and some of the different elements of, as you said, sex, gender, identity, sexual orientation. And maybe one thing to say that it says on that graphic, because I'm looking at it right now, that is just to say, all of those different aspects, so it includes identity, expression, sex, gender, and sexual orientation. None of those are the same thing, right? They don't equal the same thing, and they can be different for everybody. And I think that's where we get really maybe tripped up sometimes in trying to understand. So it's so helpful to really recognize that those are all different aspects of who we are as people. So I love that graphic too. I find it super helpful.
Yeah, so we're on A, which can mean asexual or aromantic. And my understanding of this is that refers to a person who does not have sexual attraction or romantic attraction. And I think this is another one of those communities, kind of like intersex, that have not gotten as much public attention, as many, say, cover stories and headlines. So I think there's a real awareness opportunity here that I'm certainly still growing in with the A part of the rainbow community here.
Yeah.
Pansexual is similar to bisexual, but pan meaning many. So while someone who's bisexual is attracted to people of two genders, pansexual is someone who is attracted to people of many genders. So how many, I don't know, but it's so more than two genders. So pansexual and bisexual, for some people, they might use them interchangeably, but many people don't. Unless you know someone pretty well, I don't know if you want to go into like the real technicality. So what exactly do you mean by, but on the whole, pan means many.
Yeah, it may be worth pausing, because you said that, it may be worth pausing to just remind people that although we are trying to educate and we are talking about this, like in general, other people's personal lives are really not your business. And so I think we have this fascination when it isn't our experience, trying to understand experiences that are different. And in some ways that could be a very innocent thing, and in other ways it's very like invasive and harmful. And so just to remind people, like, we're talking about things, so to just put them on the table and say, hey, people have these experiences, and so you can understand it. If somebody says they're pansexual, okay, you go, oh, okay, so they're attracted to many genders. it doesn't mean that you need to find out all the details of their personal life and who they're dating and who they're attracted to or whatever.
Yeah, I'll add, I think it was really kind of in the 1990s, somewhat in the 2000s. I think there were a lot of well-meaning people, and certainly I hear it on occasion now, but less often, say things like, well, that's your personal business, or whatever you do in your bedroom is your business. And while that may be, I think I understand what they mean by that.
Right.
But what is missing with that sentiment is the very human, social, legal, public nature of relationships that is not boiled down to what you do and don't do or don't like in the bedroom. That's really kind of dehumanizing, even though there may be good intentions. So there's a fine line that's really delicate and depends on the person in front of you of what is an okay question to ask and what isn't. And so it's balancing both the very kind of open, public, social, family, and other types of relationships. I'm not flaunting my lifestyle because I want to go on vacation with my wife, but
or
some
to the
people
grocery
would see
store or whatever.
Like, hey babe, what kind of cereal do you want? I am not rubbing anything in your face,
Right.
Some people just so it's a careful balance of both the public and the personal.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's a human need to want to be known, and I think that what you're pointing out is that when we say that phrase about like, well, whatever you do in the bedroom is your business, it sounds a bit like we don't want to know about it, or we want you to hide it still, or we want you to keep things secret still, and that are not known and not accepted or normalized in some sort of way. And people want to be known. I think the difference is maybe, I'm thinking a little bit out loud here, that it is other people's choice how and when they choose to be known in a way that's safe. And you can do your best to try and be a safe person, but it's still not your choice whether or not somebody wants to disclose anything to you. And so maybe, I don't know. Yeah, like you're saying, I'm not sure I'm quite getting the gist of that balance there, but there's a balance between knowing people and loving them and accepting them just as they are. I've been listening to a podcast about Fred Rogers, and it just makes me cry almost every episode because of his song about loving people as they are. But also giving people choice, I think, maybe is a good way to say that.
Yeah, I think something that might be helpful when trying to find this balance is to ask oneself, am I curious or asking questions because this person is a fascinating like lab rat or specimen? Or am I curious and asking questions because I want to understand and build a relationship with this person?
Yeah. No, that's really good.
So is it about kind of a peeping Tom sort of?
Yep, totally.
Ickiness?
Yeah.
Or is it really about, I want to know you so I can love you and understand you and build a relationship with you that's genuine and authentic and respectful?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's some real soul work to be doing there, especially for people who want to be allies or do already consider themselves allies. Yeah. Why? What is your motivation?
Yeah, I remember the first time a friend of mine used the term exoticization. I'm not even sure if that's correct. I pronounced it correctly, but the first time I remember hearing that, and I thought, whoa, because I, as the like epitome of normalized existence as a straight, white, cisgender guy, like, that's a danger. It's very, I all of a sudden felt very, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Conscious, or very like, aware, much more aware, but in a way that was like, oh shoot, am I doing something that I shouldn't be, or I'm maybe realizing things about myself that maybe I'm not comfortable with, like maybe I have been doing that or something, and so it is good to raise that and be aware, like that does happen, and that can be the motivation behind why you want to know more. And it's good for you to recognize that and realize I need to back off because that's not a good reason to want to know more about somebody.
Yeah, and I think that issue of exotification.
That's a much easier way to say it, I think.
Yeah, well, I thought about it for a while, but I think that issue certainly carries over to racial minorities. And as someone who lives in the United States, that's anyone who's not white or, presenting as white, that there are ways that Black bodies, especially Black women, brown people and bodies, all sorts of people who are people of color, have been sexualized in ways because of that exotic, oh, how interesting thing that's very violent. And so I think this is an opportunity for especially white people in the LGBTQ community to build solidarity and empathy that moves towards action for our friends who are people of color, whatever their gender or sexual identity is, of, hey, I know what it feels like to be the other. I know what it feels like for people to be kind of grossly interested in my experience. And that's a solidarity opportunity that I really wish more white people, or as was it Brian Stevenson says, people who think they are white, because the meaning of whiteness is socially made, constructed. So I think there's opportunity there. But speaking of, I am aware that some of these terms, and even other terms that I haven't mentioned before, have preferences, have more use, are more appropriate in various racial contexts. And there are also some terms that are more appropriate to use when talking with someone of different generations. So, for example, in my limited experience with some elders, and by that I mean kind of older end of baby boomers and older, the term queer for many of them is not that's not an okay term for a lot of them. But for younger people, kind of, millennials and younger, for a lot of people, that is the preferred term. And so just to throw that in there, that age and race and language and nationality, these are all factors in why it's even more important to follow the lead of the person you're talking to and desiring to know better.
Right. Yeah, and I, in another episode on chronic illness, I said, asking questions is a kindness. And I think, maybe some questions are better than others, but in general, asking questions is a way to maybe approach conversations with people. Yeah.
It could be, maybe.
I know. I'm kind of rethinking even as I say it. Like there are they're like questions people frame in a certain way, or haven't thought through. So maybe thoughtful questions or intentional questions. Yeah.
Well, I want to throw these other terms out there.
Okay, please.
That folks might hear, or even some people listening may say, hey, that describes me, or something. So gender fluid, gender non-conforming, and gender queer.
Okay.
These all have slight nuances and can have a little bit of different meaning. Different people can mean different things by those terms. Essentially, this is kind of similar to transgender in that the way someone understands themselves, the way someone is, the way they present themselves gender-wise is not convenient to a dualistic male and female society that many of us in North America, white North Americans perhaps, function in. And so gender fluid, gender nonconforming, gender queer are some of those terms to mean someone who is their own thing, neither male nor female, may or may not identify as transgender. It's their own thing. And similarly, if I understand this correctly, which this is another term that I'm really learning about, especially as I'm now living in the American Southwest for a couple of years, is two-spirit. So two-spirit, I looked online, and my understanding is this is someone who is gender variant. They may be a third gender. In some of the First Nations, Native American societies, there are 3, 4, however many genders in their culture.
Yeah.
And so two-spirit people sometimes even have a spiritual, a cultural, and or religious significance in some of these tribes and communities.
Yeah.
So just to kind of make sure we include our two-spirit friends and not whitewash or overly kind of Americanize some of this language.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to just recognize our Indigenous friends as well.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I have an interview with my friend Vance Blackfox, who's Cherokee, that I went to undergrad with, and he talks in that episode about two-spirit. And just to reiterate something he said that was helpful to me is to make clear that there's a distinction between two-spirit and LGBTQ. He wanted to be very clear that if you're Native American, you can be two-spirit or identify as LGBTQ. But if you are not Native American, he was saying it's not okay to identify as two-spirit because
that's right. Yeah.
Those and two-spirit, as you said, it does cover a large range of traditions. So there are tribes that had traditionally roles for people with up to 5 genders. And I have a link to a good article in the show notes for that episode. So I'll add a link to that episode as well in this one because it is very helpful when talking about two-spirit. But just to remind people that it's a Native American tradition, and so it's important to, if you are not from a Native American tradition, to claim two-spirit. And for me, part of that is respect for something that goes back, thousands of years. That's not knowledge that my people, have or had. That's not tradition that I come from. And so in order to respect that tradition, I wouldn't want to appropriate it, right?
That's a really good point. Yeah. So I totally agree. Everything that I've heard is with you on that if you are not kind of connected really in a personal family sort of way to a Native American community, that's not an appropriate term to use for yourself. I will also say there are times when looking at the acronym, there will be the number 2 in there. So LGBTQIA 2 plus, or any variation of that. And so that's what that 2 is referring to.
Gotcha.
But there are issues with that, because to have them all together like that may suggest that, this is one of the options on the menu for anyone and everyone to select, which is not really accurate. So it's kind of difficult to know. I'd be interested to hear from some other perspectives on the best way to include that experience, but also to indicate that is not up for grabs for people outside of that community.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, all of that really, I think what you're saying indicates in a number of different ways. We could go deeper on any one of these different identities, that these are complicated, can be complicated things, and to simplify them is maybe to kind of be dismissive of, the human beings that these terms sort of come from, right? The experiences that people have had. So okay, there may be others, but I think we did a pretty good job, Erica, we got through a lot of stuff that, if people are starting from zero, or they're starting from like, what's the TV show, Will and Grace?
Frankie?
If Will and Grace is where they're starting from, right, the TV show, then I think we've given them a lot of material to get started, like digging into deeper and understanding better. But I wanted to ask you this question, because we were in a Facebook conversation not too long ago, and you called me out for using the term issue. When I was trying to sort of moderate. I was playing this moderator role, which is really hard sometimes in that particular group, which shall remain unnamed. And so in trying to moderate that conversation, I used the term LGBTQ issue, and you called me out on that and said some people really don't like that because it sort of makes people into an issue, right? Like it makes people the issue, and you're not an issue. You're a person. You have experience, and you have value and dignity and all of that sort of stuff. And so to reduce, LGBTQ to an issue is sort of demeaning, and people probably would feel demeaned by that. And so I tried to do my best to take that in stride. Okay, yep, thank you for calling me out. And I still actually struggle with LGBTQ topics, LGBTQ questions, conversation, people, and I feel like I'm always trying to find the best term to use. But maybe the question for you is, what are some other terms? So issue is one of those terms to be careful about using. What are some other terms that we want? We also have mentioned using cisgendered or transgendered. Those are two terms that you should be careful about. What are some other terms that we can be more careful or aware that some people, and maybe why are those terms are a problem? Are there any others that come to mind?
Oh, there are a lot of terms that have been used.
Oh no. Well, okay, we'll have to have part two maybe, but maybe if you could think of one or two that are really helpful for people.
There are times that certain terms can have such a violent history or context that even in an educational forum, I would think twice about using those words, because they're so painful even for me now to think about them and not even say them. I mean, it's some of the wounds a lot of us who are gender and or sexual minorities carry. These are words that have been weaponized, and we have the wounds to show it, and it's really difficult. One thing I would like to just back up on is I may have called you out, but I had hoped to call you in.
Oh, yeah. I appreciate that. That's a nice clarification. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me explain what I mean by that. So to call someone out, there's been some interesting articles about this call out culture. My understanding of calling out someone is to say, I want to publicly shame you to make me look more evolved or intelligent or whatever. To call someone in, I think is a peace building. It's a relationship building. It has the potential to be nonviolent in communication. It's, hey, let me pull you aside and share with you something that I've noticed in you that I think is offensive, and you probably don't mean it as offensive. It really gives the benefit of the doubt. It is more respectful, and I think in the long run it's more effective than this call out business, the Twitter fights and all that. That might blow up and get some attention, but doesn't it really benefit someone or a community over the long haul?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not so sure. So I'm interested more in the call in, and I'm really thankful you responded the way you did, because look at us now, we're doing this podcast together, and it was a
Yeah,
call in opportunity
fantastic.
for us to say, hey, let's pull this out. Let's talk about this. And I
Mm-hmm.
also honestly did give you the benefit of the doubt. I thought, I don't always waste my time by telling people, would you please stop using that word or that language, unless I
Mm-hmm.
think that they can hear it, they can
Yeah,
receive it, and it might be worth my time, because it's
yeah,
exhausting,
yeah, yeah.
So I really appreciated that you had already presented yourself as someone who could receive that and could be open to a calling, and that's why I brought that to your attention.
Yeah. Oh my God, Erica, I love this. I love call in culture. That's so great. That's so fantastic. I've never heard that
Mm-hmm.
before. And
No.
it's so good. It's so much, and you're right. We do there's a lot of this feeling of I think people get kind of on Facebook or Twitter this hit of good feeling about themselves in a certain way, to call
Mm-hmm.
people out, like I'm right and you're wrong a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't even matter what you're calling somebody out for. That's not, you're talking about this whole other thing, which, you and I are Jesus followers. And when I hear call in culture, I think of Jesus. I mean, I just think of like the way that I feel like God wants to just embrace us, and call
Mm-hmm.
us in to community, to wholeness and health and life. And I just get that makes me so excited, Erica. It just makes me really excited to hear this term, call in culture. So thank you so much for saying that. And I do want to also say, for people maybe like myself who are on the being called in, you're giving me the benefit of the doubt. I think what's often hard is when someone does address something like that, we feel called out, right? We get
Mm-hmm.
defensive very quickly and very easily. If you are giving me the benefit of the doubt, maybe, just maybe, it's hard to do because of our lizard brains, but maybe I can also give the benefit of the doubt to somebody calling me out, that they're actually calling me in, right? What if I could do that,
Yeah.
and assume first that someone's calling me in, and then try to practice that as well, maybe in the way that I talk about things to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
But that may be, I'll say it. There are times, especially on social media, that I call out stuff just because I'm
Mm-hmm.
frustrated or tired, or you know what, the call in did not work, and I am just going to rant, like that happens on occasion. But
Yeah.
when there's an opportunity to call in, yeah, I mean, I'm a pastor. I could do a sermon on this. I have done sermons on this,
Mm-hmm.
that I think it really is a celebration of the Holy Spirit within me,
Mm-hmm.
receiving and recognizing the Holy Spirit in you. Let's
Mm-hmm.
get those spirits together and sort this out.
Yeah.
So I just want to clarify something. The
Mm-hmm.
language of calling in, I
Mm-hmm.
own it, I love it, but I did not coin it. So I want to give credit to my sister Sean Ferguson. She's a South African feminist, and she wrote an article that I'll send over to you to include in the notes.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I think it's really important on all sorts of topics. I mean, we all got
Mm-hmm.
stuff to learn, whether it's LGBTQ, terms, whether it's gender, race, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
ableism, whatever it
Yeah.
is. So I think it's just a really powerful article, and I'm so thankful she wrote that.
Yeah, cool. Oh, I can't wait to read it. So you really have articulated well, when you are pointing out something, a much better way, and some assumptions to have to call people in. What are some things maybe that are helpful when someone is calling you in or pointing out something that you've said that might feel hurtful or offensive to somebody? What are some things
Mm-hmm.
that maybe you do or that are helpful to you in how you respond to that helps you not be defensive, you know?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. As soon as you asked that question, I instinctively took a deep breath.
Oh, yeah. I'll leave that deep
Yeah.
breath in, you know? That's great.
Yeah.
One of my favorite podcasts, Encountering Silence, in the middle of every episode has they ring a bell and they say, take this 30 seconds of silence and just to be silent, you know?
Yeah.
So I'll leave that long pause in there just for that.
I have some Quaker leanings. I am Mennonite.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of jokingly but seriously identify as Episcopabaptite. So
That's great.
yeah, I am a Mennonite pastor. So
Yeah.
I know not everyone listening to the program is religious, but because that's where I come from, you know, I think the Bible records Jesus talking a lot.
Mm.
There are times when he's just there, and there are things happening that he doesn't speak to. He's
Hmm.
listening.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me.
Yeah.
I think that's also the case with the prophets, Moses, among others. Certainly other traditions. There are, special and sacred and important people who model this sort of compassion. The golden rule,
Mm-hmm.
do unto others as you would have them do unto you, shows up in all the major world religions. So I
Mm-hmm.
would really encourage
Yeah.
people to treat it as a spiritual exercise, an opportunity for holistic growth,
Mm.
mind, body, and spirit. I am going to center my mind and my spirit, so my body will be centered, and I can receive and listen and have hard conversations, especially when we anticipate them coming.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I would
Mm-hmm.
also say, since a lot of our communication is written, it's like we've gone old school, except
Yeah.
it's instant writing rather than through, the horse and carriage taking
Right.
the letter across. um, Before you click that send button, before you hit, send on your phone for a text message or whatever,
Mm.
let that draft just sit for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, finish the next thing on your to-do list, take a walk, take a shower, whatever, and then
Mm-hmm.
come back to it. And just ask yourself again, what are my motives for responding the way I do? Why do I feel the way I do? And if it's just a conversation within yourself, hopefully you can be really honest about it, which will hopefully illuminate that. And, like I said, as a Christian, I'm going to use some Holy Spirit language that
Mm-hmm.
I'll in my sense of prayer and reflection and silence, ask the Holy Spirit to develop in me the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control.
Mm.
So if my response is not reflecting one of those fruit of the Spirit, it is not coming from the image of God, the divine self that I carry. It's
Mm-hmm.
coming from somewhere else, and I need to think twice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. That's great advice. Well, Erica, this has been just a absolute pleasure and fantastic conversation. I'm really thankful for you spending your time with me and taking the time to talk about all these things. I hope it's been very helpful for me. So I really think it will be helpful for other people. But it is a good time to maybe start wrapping up. And I like to wrap up with 3 things. Something that we learned. It may be something that we were reminded of, and something that we can do, an action step we might recommend for people, and something that we can recommend as a resource, or it could be a book or a movie or links. We've already mentioned a lot of those things, but I will go first. Normally I try to write things down to remember them ahead of time, but I was just enjoying the conversation so much I forgot to write down like the things I was wanting to remember. Oh, but something I learned that it feels like a little bit maybe paradigm shifting for me, and I'm really excited to read this article, is this idea of calling people in instead of calling people out, and maybe the idea of a call in culture being the antithesis to all those negatives about call out culture. So I that's a new term to me and something that I'm really excited to kind of sit with and see how that can also change how I respond to people and react to people in conversations that are difficult. So I'm really thankful for that. Something we can do, I think between you and I, all the links that we've mentioned, the show notes are going to be very full of really, really good resources. If you don't identify as LGBTQIA plus or gender sexual minority, and you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about the things that Erica and I have talked about, click on some links in the show notes and do some reading. That's a good place to start. As we've kind of mentioned earlier in the show too, there's more to it than just reading and educating yourself. You know, you listen to this podcast and maybe learn some things. That's another step along the way. Maybe there's something that you didn't understand or something that maybe didn't make sense to you, or you want to learn more about, or you want to understand better. Do some reading. And then the other thing that I would also maybe add to that, the flip side of that is, if you don't know people who identify in some way as LGBTQ IA plus gender and sexual minorities, I need to start using that, because it's just, I know that people struggle with the acronym, and that's why gender and sexual minorities is much it's very helpful. It's a little easier to say. Find groups. It could be through GLAAD, PFLAG, welcoming and affirming congregations in your area. I believe there's a good website. If you don't know it, I will track it down on congregations that are welcoming and affirming. But go find people in your town, in your city, and just get to know them. Spend time hanging out without agenda, and get to know people just on a very human level, and you'll find there's a lot that you'll learn that you're not going to learn from reading the links in the show notes. Yeah, and I guess we've shared a lot, so I don't have an additional thing to recommend. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Erica, your turn. What are your three things for this incredible conversation we just had?
Well, I certainly have enjoyed our conversation. I think I mentioned before, I'm a pastor, and one of my areas of just that gets me going every morning is interfaith peace building. And I really have passion for Jewish, Christian, and Muslim people having dialogue that is meaningful. And so I think one of the things that I wanted to share towards the end here is from Genesis chapter 1, which is a text that is respected and considered sacred in all three of those Abrahamic faiths. And so in this creation narrative, when God is creating, there are some broad categories named, and then there are some specifics. So I'll just read a couple verses from the Inclusive Bible. Genesis 1:11, or I'll back up to 10. God called the dry ground earth, and the gathering of the waters sea. And God saw that this was good. Then God said, earth, produce vegetation, plants that scatter their own seeds, and every kind of fruit tree that bears fruit with its own seed in it. And then down to verse 20, of living beings. Birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the sky. God created great sea monsters and all sorts of swimming creatures, which the waters were filled, and all kinds of birds. So where I'm going with this is, I think whenever it comes to any groups, there is a broad grouping, and there's also specificity that's really lovely. And I see God as mirroring that in Genesis 1, which many of the major world religions would see as sacred. And so sometimes there's a temptation to get tired or frustrated as people who are educating themselves or growing in their allyship. To say, you know what, this is so complicated, it's so confusing, or I wish it was just simple, but it's worth it, because to understand LGBTQ identities, terms, and people is one way that we love God and love God's creation. It's not about agreeing or disagreeing with a certain theological point. It's about just recognizing you are created person, you are my equal, and that's important. So I would really encourage people for further resources and what we can do is quite literally soul searching. Because in my opinion, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I get that. But as a pastor, I think of everything social and relational as really coming down to a spiritual issue. So whatever one's faith is, especially if you're Christian, which I would most be able to speak to, I would most encourage people to really look into their faith tradition and how they can just love people sincerely and love people the way God loves people, which doesn't have a lot of strings attached. That would be both kind of a resource and what we can do next, which I think could be really meaningful. I don't think I had heard before about the Intersex Society of North America. I learned that from you and really appreciate that. Oh, some cool. Of the things you shared about Two-Spirit experience, that was interesting to me, and I really look forward to listening to that other episode. And so I think there's so much to continue to learn for myself, and I've been in the community for a while, and I think there's so much for other folks to continue learning. Don't get overwhelmed by it. Just one at a time, one step at a time. Doing something is better than nothing. And I hope we can grow in compassion and love as individuals and as groups of people.
That's a fantastic note to end on. Thank you so much, Erica, for your time and for sharing from your knowledge, and also just I really appreciate your spirit of being willing to both say, like, this is what I know, this is what I'm learning. We kind of live in a culture and a society where everybody feels like they need to be an expert, and I really appreciate your approach as somebody who knows a lot more than I do about a lot of this topic, also approaching it that way. And it's very, as you said, it calls me in, and it's very, very inviting. So thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you so much, Lucas. Really a pleasure. I look forward to seeing what comes from our conversation in the future.
Thanks for joining us today on We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land. If you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Help us spread the word by sharing it on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram with the handle @WDTAT Podcast. You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can support the podcast by visiting our website at wdtatpodcast.com and clicking on support. You can make a one-time donation or consider becoming a monthly supporter through Patreon. You'll receive bonus content and access to patron-only benefits. Thanks for your support. We would love to hear from you. Leave us a voicemail by going to our website and clicking Send Voicemail. Your voicemail could be featured in a future episode. You can also email us at wdtatpodcast@gmail.com. Many thanks to Neil Curran and Infielder for the use of their music. You can find more of their music online at infielder.bandcamp.com. A final thought from Brené Brown. The willingness to show up changes us. It makes us a little braver each time. Until next time, keep showing up and keep being brave.
What are you gonna do?